Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we are going to talk about an interesting part of legal representation in the 21st century. We're going to talk about crisis managers. What is a crisis manager? A crisis manager is somebody who can come in and help an individual, like a doctor, or a corporation, like Subway, manage a terrible situation in such a way that its reputation comes out intact and that it doesn't suffer too much of a loss for being associated with a particularly bad event. So let's talk a little bit about what happened to Subway several years ago. A kid by the name of Jared wrote to him and said, "Hey, I lost a whole bunch of weight using, the Veggie Delight sandwich from Subway, and I think I'd be a good spokesman for your company." And indeed, Jared sold a lot of sandwiches. And I think Subway was generally pretty happy with his performance in that regard. He had a pleasing demeanor. I think he came off good on television. But like a lot of people who get success, having money allowed him to indulge some of his darker desires, I guess I would say. And as a result, he was arrested and prosecuted in Indiana for things that cannot be discussed on this channel because of YouTube's policies, and I think they're good policies. But the bottom line is that there was certain to be a lot of blowback against Subway. Well, one of the things that Subway did is they hired a competent crisis management firm, and the crisis management firm went to work separating Subway from Jared. And I think they did a reasonably good job because if you think about it right now, other than knowing that Jared was associated with Subway, you don't recall hearing anything bad about Subway, the corporation, as a result of simply having made a bad hiring choice. And I think that's important because whenever somebody who is in the limelight, like Jared was, and he winds up getting in trouble the way he did, there is often a great deal of blowback. So, what does a crisis manager do? And a lot of law firms are offering this service now. I kind of think that's a bad idea, but I'll deal with that in a little bit. A lot of private firms are engaging in this kind of service. And basically what a crisis manager does is they look at the business model of the company and they try to identify areas where there might be a crisis in the future. Now, that's a little bit like being a good science fiction writer because you have to imagine alternative possible futures. But there are certain things, I think, that you can plan for. Let's take the mythical corporation XYZ Company. An XYZ Company, they manufacture a product, and in the manufacturing of that product, they use certain chemicals. And those chemicals, if they get dumped into the drain, well, they might wind up in the water supply, and if they wind up in the water supply, they might make people sick. So one of the things that the crisis manager does when he signs on is he says, okay, you got a potential problem here. Let's take a look and make sure that you don't have currently a problem in this regard. Well, as fate would have it, XYZ Corporation has for several years had Buford in the employee of its chemical processing division, and every now and then there'll be a leak develop in one of the containers, and he'll pour it over into a different container, and then he'll use the hose and rinse that stuff right down the drain and just not tell anybody about it because he knows all that stuff about those chemicals in the water not hurt or being harmful are just a lot of people overreacting. So the crisis manager does an investigation, finds that there is this chemical in the water, and then they put together a communications plan to deal with the fallout. One of the first things they're going to hire is counsel, and counsel is, of course, going to direct that crisis management team. Crisis management is really about public relations and getting the message out and doing the right thing. As I mentioned in my earlier video about kindness as a litigation strategy, crisis management as a litigation strategy involves doing the right thing. And doing the right thing is often an unpopular choice. For example, you might have a corporate bigwig who says, look, nobody's figured out we've dumped this stuff. Nobody needs to know. Let's not rock the boat. Why would we, incur all of that liability if nobody knows? And it's sort of like the old Pennzoil ads. The old Pennzoil ad said, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. You can put, $30 worth of oil in your car today, or you can pay $500 to have your engine rebuilt down the road. It's very much the same thing. If you go and you act proactively, you reduce the risk, you mitigate the harm, people realize that you are proactive and that you did the right thing. And as a result of that, it always limits the amount of damages, if any, that wind up being awarded against you. The same kind of help can work for a doctor. Several years ago, we had a doctor in the southern part of Missouri who made an honest mistake. It's the kind of honest mistake that happens, and usually it gets caught, but sometimes it doesn't. And in this particular case, what I think happened is the technician who was assisting in placing this dual chamber pacemaker, one that paces the atrium of the heart first and then paces the ventricle second, so you get a bump, 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 bump kind of thing. It was exactly reversed, and the thing that was pacing the atrium was pacing it after the ventricle. So you got this, and as a result, the patient developed congestive heart failure and ultimately passed away. And I just realized I said the technician. I should have said the cardiologist. The cardiologist inserted the leads incorrectly. The technician was there, and the technician should have caught it, but didn't. And we believe later on the technician may have played some role in the loss of certain evidence, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. That was an awful situation. One of the complicating factors for the doctor is that the strips that were run during the insertion of the pacemaker suddenly went missing. They weren't in the medical records. They weren't in the doctor's records. The technician who engaged in helping the doctor put in the pacemaker, he didn't have them. And as a result, there was no way to verify that the pacemaker had been inserted properly. And that made the likelihood that it was inserted improperly a great deal more likely. As a result of that, it began to look like they were trying to cover things up. And a lot of times what happens, particularly with doctors and yes, even lawyers, is that because they have such sort of strong defense mechanisms, believing that they really can't do anything wrong, they often push back and say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I put that thing right where it was. And indeed, that's what they did in this situation. And they said the reason that the gentleman died was from some unknown myocardial virus. Now, they couldn't tell us what virus that was. They didn't test for any virus. The pathologist didn't find any virus when they did the autopsy. As a result, it began to look exactly like what it was, a bit of a cover-up. When you have a cover-up, you have to remember what happened in Watergate. It wasn't the crime that got Nixon in trouble, it was the cover-up. If he had come out and said, I hired those guys and I told them I wanted intelligence, but I didn't tell them to break the law. And as a result, I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We might have a lot more bridges named after Richard Nixon. But because he hunkered down and developed a bunker mentality, eventually he wound up having to resign from the presidency. And I think it's important to note that good crisis management can avert that kind of thing by talking about the worth of doing the right thing in the first instance. So if they had come to the family and said, we made a terrible mistake, we put this in wrong, here's what we're prepared to do for you, and these are the things that we're going to do to make sure this never happens again, I think honestly there might have been a much smaller settlement in that case than there was. And I guess I should be glad they didn't do it, but in reality, all of the people involved suffered as a result of what was very poor crisis management. Now, imagine you have a product manufacturer who makes something like a car. He's got a product that he's proud of, he puts it out, and all of a sudden it has sudden unintended acceleration. That's the point where you hire a crisis manager, you do a deep dive, you figure out what the problem is, and you get it fixed. But if you don't do that, then you wind up with litigation running against the company for decades and paying millions in legal bills as a result. And this happens every day. Maybe not sudden unintended acceleration, but recalls that lead to people being hurt. You may recall what happened in the Ford Pinto case, where Ford did a back of the envelope calculation and said, it will cost us more to fix this design defect than it will to pay the claims. And of course, when that memo was revealed in the course of litigation, it ramped up the heat in that case a great deal and caused there to be multiple punitive damage awards. That's something that I think people need to consider when they realize that they have a crisis that is looming on the horizon. A lot of times you get good notification about things like this. You will find out that you've got a whistleblower and that they're talking to the government, for example. And that's the time to engage crisis management because that's the time to be proactive. The way it normally works is you hire an attorney or you have your general counsel go to your outside counsel and say, we've got this problem, we need a crisis manager, and the lawyer hires the crisis manager. And the reason that they do that is so that they can be candid and direct and reveal the full scale of the problem to the crisis manager so that that person is working with the best amount of information that they can possibly have to make this problem less of a problem in the media space. That is, in essence, what a crisis manager does. Now, if it sounds like somebody who's just slinging a lot of BS, I'm sure there are people like that who do that. But for the most part, most crisis managers know that if they want to ever be hired by another company, they can't blow it for the companies that they are representing. And so I think a lot of times they put together a careful and well thought out plan to mitigate the crisis. I don't think Norfolk Southern has a good crisis management response. I think its crisis management response has been abysmal to this point. But perhaps they will get on the ball and get something moving in that regard too. It can have a very positive effect going forward. It can prevent reputational injury, and that is something that is very important, particularly now that everybody has a computer on their desk and get instant access to news. I also said I thought that it was a bad idea to have your lawyers as your crisis managers, because in that situation you don't have an independent crisis management person. The reason you need an independent crisis management person is that sometimes the legal advice can conflict with doing the right thing, and you want your crisis manager to be independent of your lawyers because you don't want the lawyers driving the crisis management. You want the crisis management there to advise the company and do it without having the filter of the lawyers coming in and saying, we don't recommend that. The lawyers may come in and say, we don't recommend that anyway, but the crisis managers need to be able to operate independent of the lawyers. They should work in conjunction with them, but their advice should be their advice, and it shouldn't be legal advice. And just one final thing, there are a lot of people out there providing these services and a lot of firms doing it. You should evaluate them very carefully. In this instance, somebody who says they are accomplished in the dark arts of public relations, that may be a clue that they are not interested in doing the right thing, and you always want somebody who's interested in doing the right thing. So that's what I have for you today. Hopefully this has been something useful and helpful. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to put them down below in the comments. If you would, I'd appreciate it if you'd like and share this video with other people who may be interested in it. And as always, go out of your way today to try to do something nice for somebody else. That's something that you can do to make your life better and their life better. And every time you make somebody else's life better, you automatically make yours better. Think about that. Have a terrific day, and I will catch you down here at the beach next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.